Imagine hearing the roar of an aircraft engine growing louder and louder, only to realize that the pilot flying the plane has no intention of returning home. In the final months of World War II, Allied naval forces in the Pacific faced a terrifying and unusual tactic: Japanese pilots deliberately crashing their planes into enemy ships. These missions were called kamikaze attacks, and the word itself has become synonymous with desperate or suicidal actions. But why was this term used? Why kamikaze? To understand the meaning behind the name, we have to travel back centuries before World War II to a moment in Japanese history when nature itself was believed to have saved the nation. Let's explore, right here, on History of Simple Things. The word kamikaze comes from two Japanese words, kami meaning god or spirit, and kaze meaning wind. Together, the term literally translates to divine wind. This phrase has deep historical roots tied to a dramatic event that occurred in the 13th century. During that time, the powerful Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan attempted to invade Japan not once but twice, in 1274 and again in 1281. The Mongols had already conquered vast territories across Asia and were confident they could overpower Japan as well. They assembled enormous fleets of ships filled with soldiers and sailed toward the Japanese islands. However, something extraordinary happened. Both invasion attempts were struck by massive typhoons that devastated the Mongol fleets. Ships were smashed against the rocks, thousands of soldiers drowned, and the invasion forces were effectively wiped out before they could fully conquer the islands. To the Japanese people, this was not just a lucky coincidence. It was interpreted as divine intervention. They believed the storms were sent by the gods to protect Japan. These powerful storms became known as the kamikaze, or divine winds that saved the nation from invasion. For centuries afterward, the story of the divine wind became a powerful symbol in Japanese culture. It represented the idea that Japan was protected by higher forces and destined to survive even in the face of overwhelming enemies. This historical legend remained deeply embedded in national identity. Fast forward to the 20th century, and Japan once again found itself in a desperate military situation during World War II. By 1944, Japan was losing ground rapidly in the Pacific. Allied forces, particularly the United States, were advancing closer to the Japanese mainland, capturing island after island. Japan's Navy and Air Force had been severely weakened, and the country was running low on experienced pilots and resources. Facing this grim reality, Japanese military leaders developed a new and extreme strategy. Instead of traditional combat missions, they organized special attack units where pilots would deliberately crash their explosive-filled aircraft into enemy ships. The goal was to cause as much damage as possible, even if it meant sacrificing the pilot's life. These missions were officially called Tokubetsu Kogekitai, meaning special attack units. However, the name that quickly became widely known, both inside and outside Japan, was kamikaze. The choice of this word was not accidental. By invoking the term divine wind, Japanese leaders hoped to connect these missions to the legendary storms that once protected the nation from the Mongol invasions. The symbolism was powerful. Just as the divine wind had destroyed enemy fleets centuries earlier, these pilots would now become the modern version of that wind, striking Allied ships to defend Japan. In a sense, the pilots themselves were portrayed as the human embodiment of the kamikaze. The first organized kamikaze attacks began in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, one of the largest naval battles in history. Japanese pilots loaded their aircraft with bombs or fuel and aimed directly for Allied warships, particularly aircraft carriers and destroyers. Because the planes were intentionally crashed into targets, the attacks were extremely difficult to stop once the aircraft got close enough. Some kamikaze strikes caused devastating damage, sinking ships and killing hundreds of sailors. However, these missions came at a terrible cost. Thousands of young pilots lost their lives carrying out kamikaze attacks. Many were barely out of their teens. Some volunteered willingly, believing they were defending their homeland and fulfilling their duty. Others felt intense pressure from military culture and propaganda that emphasized honor, sacrifice, and loyalty to the emperor. The image of the kamikaze pilot became one of the most tragic and controversial symbols of the war. Despite the fearsome reputation of these attacks, they ultimately could not change the outcome of the conflict. While kamikaze missions damaged or sank dozens of Allied ships, the industrial power and manpower of the Allied forces far exceeded Japan's ability to sustain such tactics. By the summer of 1945, Japan was on the brink of defeat. Shortly after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered, bringing World War II to an end. Today, the word kamikaze has taken on a broader meaning beyond its historical origins. In everyday language, it often refers to any action that involves reckless or self-destructive risk. For example, someone might describe a dangerous strategy or decision as kamikaze. However, the original meaning remains tied to the historical and cultural context of Japan during World War II and the ancient legend of the divine wind. So the next time you hear the word kamikaze, remember that it doesn't just describe a wartime tactic. It carries with it centuries of history, from legendary storms that shattered invading fleets to the desperate final chapters of World War II. What began as the story of a divine wind ultimately became one of the most haunting symbols of sacrifice and tragedy in modern history. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.